This is my party. There's gonna be no wake and no funeral. So grab the free booze while it lasts. Come on.
The opening scene of the movie is showing two main protagonists, Brandon, a director by profession, and Nick Stark, an artist by profession, shifting and setting in their new home with friends. Both are shown as gay couple. The starting scene hints to us that Brandon is uncomfortable in a relationship with Nick when it comes to Nick's mom. But Nick recalls Brandon's mother in a flashback when she was also uncomfortable with their relationship. The progressing scene cracks the flow when Brandon comes to Nick to tell him about his England tour. He is distressed when Nick tells him that he has AIDS by saying, "You won't leave me," to which Brandon hugs and replies, "No, I won't leave you." That's a lot to digest in the first 5 minutes of the movie. Gradually, Nick finds out that Brandon is uncomfortable with his disease news, and he starts to avoid him. Now, some other day a party is being held by Nick, who invites his LGBT group to his house. As Brandon comes back from England straight to the party home, both corals end up in separate portions of the house. Such a rash step. Meanwhile, Nick gets himself separated from Brandon into a new house. The next scene indicates 1 year after, when Nick's health is getting worse. He is forgetting things and loses strength. One of his friends, Tony, suggests having a test, CT scan. The doctor tells him that he has an advanced stage mental disease called PMO. Gosh. Nick and the doctor conclude the conversation with some plan B. After returning home, Nick contacts Brandon on call to meet him as he tells him about his declining mental condition. But Brandon doesn't agree to meet as he talks about another task outside the town. How rude of Brandon. On one side, a friend, Charlene, of Nick advises inviting Brandon to a party, but he denies inviting him. On the other hand, Zach, who is helping Brandon in directing the film, asks about his disturbed mood on the film set as he knows Nick is behind it. While Amalia, Nick's mother, gets emotional in a scene about Nick's deteriorating health, but Nick consoles her to not worry. Here we are worried about Nick. What is going to happen next? Now the guests are coming as everyone is worried about Nick deteriorating sadly. Charlene comes to Brandon without telling Nick, as she wants him to attend the party. She tells him that it is a farewell party from Nick to his loved ones before he is going to have a complete mental breakdown. Here Brandon takes a bold and evil mood as he refuses to come. After her departure, Brandon decides to visit Nick's home party. While driving the car, a flashback appears to Brandon when their friend Joe was struggling to overcome the same disease as Nick, God. This may be a sign of his remorse for Nick. It should be. Another warm flashback hits Brandon while driving when he and Nick help their friend Joe to die in his sleep. Yes, Brandon dares to give his presentation at the party, but he is not much welcomed by Nick and Nick's guest too. He tells him that he is going to Australia to complete his shooting. Charlene tells Brandon that Nick has 4 to 5 days left alive. No, this couldn't be. While Nick's family asks Brandon to say goodbye to Nick and leave as he is disturbing Nick's health by his presence. Here comes a quarrel between Tony and Brandon when Tony asks him to leave the party by telling him about his disease. But Brandon insists on staying for Nick. Tony makes him realize that he has already lost all his rights over Nick when he kicked him out of his house. Brandon finds out a wall full of photos with the names of their mutual friends who died of AIDS. My goodness. About hearing about their plan for Nick, Brandon gets shocked. Nick is planning to kill himself biseconal. Shocking for everybody. Again, a flashback is seen by Brandon where he is spending his best time with Nick skiing in the snow. He is recalling this beautiful memory by seeing Nick attending to his guests. While sitting with a closed one of Nick, Brandon expresses for the first time that he was scared by his disease of Nick, so he left him. Maybe he is a good man. What do you people think? Nick shows his aggression in front of Brandon about his dementia problem. Now Nick is distributing the parting gifts among his family and friends, then certainly welcomes his father at the party who disrupts his mother. Upon hearing from Charlene, Brandon comes to know that Nick has been living for the past year alone in his new house. Brandon thought that he had been living together with Tony. We people have to rethink his remorse for Nick. Do we? Another friend of Nick takes his attention to what he is going to do with himself, but Nick tells him to let this thing go. He better know what he's doing. Poor soul. The next scene shows a little quarrel between Nick's parents. His mother blames his father that he left them, and for this reason Nick is gay. but Nick stops them by saying that his profession has made him and not his father. While Monty, Nick's friend, is arguing with Brandon and forces him to leave the last hours of Nick with his close friends. Now a most touching scene comes when Nick and Brandon are talking about Brandon's abandoning Nick during the most important time of his life. They both accuse each other of not staying together. Brandon asks Nick if he allows him to stay, and Brandon can cancel his flight to Australia to spend time together, on which Nick asks him to do whatever he wants. What a cruel situation we got caught in. A flashback comes to Brandon when Nick was about to leave their house. He was crying to leave their home. Brandon yells when he recalls that scene while driving back home. On another day, Nick realizes that he is losing his sense of sight, also, but is helpless. Such evil revenge of nature. On the very next morning, Nick spends time with his mother, who cries and begs him to not leave her as he consoles her. Now everyone, including Nick's family and close friends, is having breakfast with Nick as Nick is complaining about his eyesight. He is not even recognizing his father standing in front of him. We are feeling a lot for Nick. Alas, here comes Brandon again to Nick's house with Nick's favorite dog, Opala. Nick warmly welcomes the dog. Brandon gives a sundial watch to Nick, and just as he is about to say something gets interrupted by one of his friends of Nick. He recalls Nick that they should go and check the finishing touch of the house Nick has designed. Brandon allows himself to go with Nick, to which Nick agrees. As they arrive at the place, Nick's design house, Brandon recalls their trip to Santorini while watching the design of the house. Brandon asks Nick about Tony, and if Nick is in a relationship with him or not. Nick replies that they both are a friend. Brandon tells him about his non-relationship with his helper Zach. He recalls another moment of Nick and him together, when they were skiing in the hills together, happy together. Brandon begs Nick to cut down his cold behavior with him. Maybe he wants them together again. Nobody can predict. Back home, Nick is again busy attending his today's party. His mother gets offended by the number of people in his house. She asks Tony to get rid of him, as she does not want to see any person in the house. She wants to spend his son's left time with him alone. Brandon comes into the backyard sitting with Charlene and expresses his grief about Nick's leaving. She asks him to try again to win back Nick's trust. In the house, everybody is taking pictures with Nick as a memory to keep. Tony reminds Brandon to take everybody out of the house before the sunset. Gosh, we can't miss any single scene left of the movie. Nick's dad talks about his disease that he should have told him earlier. Nick replies that he could not tell him about his gay thing to his father, as he could be ashamed of his son. His father tells him that his perspective has changed after he watched Nick with his friends who care for him. His father tells him that he is not a good father to his children. Nick gives credit to his father that he is the reason he became an artist. Already teary? Yes, I am. The next scene is staging Brandon talking to Nick's mother. He asks if he could be useful in any way to her. She replies that Nick has eased the pain already, as he has left written instructions after he will be gone. Brandon asks about his funeral services, but she tells him that Nick does not want any funeral gathering. She tells Brandon that Nick wants her to scatter his ashes in Santorini. Brandon grieves and tells her that it is a place where they two met. Oh dear, what a tragedy. Brandon asks for her permission to stay after all the guests will leave. She agrees that Nick would want him to stay also, even though he does not say this. Nick says goodbye to his friends as everybody is sobbing while hugging him. Here Monty is leaving and saying his goodbye. Monty gets emotional while embracing Nick. He encourages Monty to stay strong even if he gets caught in bad health. Now Charlene has a turn to say goodbye. Nick offers a walk to Brandon, which Tony interrupts and stops him, but he insists on going on a walk with Brandon. Now the final talk. Nick advises Brandon to make the kind of films he used to make in college. Brandon expresses that Nick is the one who created a difference in his life and brought him out of his shell. Nick agrees that they had a great time together. Brandon gets misty-eyed when seeing the horses Nick still has with him. One of the horses Nick gave him as a birthday gift. Nick tells Brandon to be strong for him and not cry. Nick gives him instructions about the food routine of his dog Opala. He tries to remember where they got the dog, but he is not. He can't actually remember. We are not letting it go. We just can't. Once again, Brandon is giving us goosebumps by telling everyone about their Switzerland trip. Nick excuses himself and goes to the bathroom to take Seconal. Brandon follows and takes him to his bedroom. Nick recalls their good time together. Brandon tells him that he will miss his presence, but Nick says that he will find somebody else after Nick will be gone. Oh my dear, we are now saying goodbye to Nick. Such an attachment to his character. Brandon takes Nick to his mother to say goodbye. He asks his mother to take care of herself always. Tony calls Nick and shows him their trip to Europe last year. We can't believe that it is the final scene, the scene we have been waiting for. Brandon asks Tony to take Nick to his bed as he should be spending his last moments with his family. It's the time Nick starts to close his eyes. Brandon takes him to his bed and tells him to imagine they are skiing in the mountains as Nick finally shut his eyes close. This party has its funny, sad, and awkward moments, but at the end, you'll be glad you went. I am grieving hard for the passing of Newton-John, and her warmth here is genuine and welcome. It's a powerful and moving film, and I would recommend you to watch this movie. Please don't forget to leave us a like and subscribe. Comment below what you want to see us work on next.